Welcome. We're going to be installing Git on Linux. In particular, I'll be doing this on Linux Mint. I'm doing that because there are literally hundreds, perhaps even thousands of distributions of Linux, and you just have to pick one and go with it. So my favorite, especially desktop-oriented Linux distribution, is Linux Mint. So that's the one I'll be featuring. In general, we're going to I do have a few general notes about my installations. First of all, I have Google Chrome installed on all my systems. This keeps things consistent between all my operating systems that I support. Of course, any modern browser is perfectly fine to use. I have made a few adjustments, and this, especially for my install of Linux Mint, it is a fresh install, but I have made a few tweaks to it for better viewing and with fewer distractions. And you might be wondering, why should I bother watching an install video? And for the most part, if you think you can handle it on your own, by all means, go for it. It's not hard, but I do have a few tricks along the way, especially the prompt adjustments that I make. And I like to make sure that I show all my work. So it's all in that vein. And I do have installation notes for those that prefer that approach. The process is going to be installing Git. I'm going to be doing that via the package manager. And on this system, it'll be apt-get. Then I'll demonstrate the help and documentation, both from a terminal perspective and from online. Then we'll set up the minimal configuration and perhaps a bit more. And then finally, we'll configure our bash environment with the Git Prompt script. This is something I like to set up on all my systems so that it's consistent look and feel in the terminal regardless of the operating system. Because not all the operating systems, especially Mac and Linux, have everything all set up the way I like it. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I have my Linux Mint desktop install. I'm using Cinnamon, which is based on the GNOME 3, I believe. So I'm going to invoke my terminal, which I have set up as a desktop icon. I'm going to move this up a little bit. And let's make sure we're up to date, which we should be, but I just want to make sure. I have to use the sudo command for any of the apt-get type of package installation things I do. So apt-get update. All right, so that is up to date. Now let's go ahead and do the upgrades of any packages that need to be upgraded. I always like to do this prior to any installs. So this isn't specific to Git, it's just something I like doing before I install any new software. I'm going to do -y to make sure I accept the Y prompt. And now we're off to do the upgrades. Great. Now that we're done and now that we're fully up to date and upgraded all our packages, let's go ahead and do our install of Git. All right. Do a which Git. We shouldn't have anything yet. So now we do sudo apt-get install Git. And although we're not going to cover it, and although you might be interested in doing the GUI piece, if we do git-GUI, it will install the GUI as well, the official Git GUI. So if we just do git and then git-GUI, then I'm going to do -y to accept it and press enter. Great, now we have everything installed. Let's go ahead and test it out. Now I should be able to do a which git, and git is installed in USR bin. And now if we do a git version, it tells us which version of Git is installed. Now, of course, this version of Git is slightly behind the official version of Git that's available on the official Git website, but it's not that big a deal. I mean, in my opinion, the upgrades or the updates are relatively minor between the different versions. So if you were like version 1.2, I mean version 1 versus version 2, that's a big difference, but you know, we're talking about just a few minor releases, probably just weeks away from each other. So it's not that big a deal. At least nothing to affect anything we're going to be doing. All right, now that we have installed Git on Linux Mint, let's look at getting help. Back on the VM, I'm going to type git help. And that just returns back how to use the git command, including several common commands that are used, and towards the bottom it gives us more information on how to use the help command. If we do git help -a, it gives us a list of all the available commands we can do inside of Git, and we can get more information about a particular command by specifying that into the help subcommand. So let's do that now. One of the next commands we'll be using when we get to the configuration section is the config subcommand. So git help and then the name of the command, config. That brings up a man style help page about the config command. So we can navigate, we can go line by line by using the arrow keys, up and down, or we can page down using the spacebar. And when you're finished looking at the man page, you can quit by pressing Q. And that takes us back to the terminal. There is an alternative syntax. We can use git, and then the command we're interested in, config, then --help. And this is definitely one of those things you could remember when you know basically the subcommand you want to use, but you're just not sure about all the options you can use. So, and when we do that, it brings up the same man page to the config subcommand. All right, let's quit back. We can even combine the two approaches to get help on the help command. So git help --help, and brings up a manual page on help. All right, let's quit out of here. Now let's use our web browser to look at help on the official Git website. Go to git-scm.com. That's the official Git website. Once there, find the documentation page, and underneath documentation, go to reference. Here we have a nice listing of the various commands grouped by their functionality. In particular, we have setup and config, and underneath that we have config. So if we click on that, we can see kind of a similar type page, but this kind of looks a little better because we have the benefit of the web page type design to separate things out nicely and have things formatted. And we can keep navigating around and go to the help command, have the same concept, or really anything else. There's a lot of documentation available on the official Git website, although some of it's pretty technical. So it's one of the reasons why I like doing these courses, because it helps you ease into it. As you become more experienced with Git, some of these pages will make a bit more sense. All right, now on to the Git configuration. And we'll start off with the minimal settings required, and then we'll add in a couple more settings after that. All right. We're starting off in our user's home directory, that's /home/my username. If I do an ls-a, I see I have a handful of hidden files, but the file that we're looking for that will be created very soon will be the .git config file. And as we run these configuration commands, Git will create that file for us. But right now, it doesn't exist. To start off, we're going to type git config --global. Now, oddly enough, you would think that global is global, but it's not. It's user level. It's global to the currently logged in user. That's how you can best think of it. There is a system level that is really available for settings that are set inside the Git installation location. That is truly global. I mean, that's applied to all the users on the system. But global in this context actually means the user level. So when we use --global, it's writing those settings to a .git config file within our user's home directory, and we'll see that in just a minute. The first setting we're going to set is the username. So user.name, and that's usually the pattern we use. We have the top level grouping of settings, that's user, and then the particular attribute underneath that. So that's name. Then in double quotes, we'll actually put your name. So I'm going to put my name in here. Then press enter. All right, next, let's set the next setting. Git config --global. User.email. Then within double quotes, put your email address. I'm going to use my student@radiant.training. I recommend that you use the email address that you're going to be using with your GitHub account if you're planning on using GitHub. or whatever your remote repository is going to be. It makes sense to keep these kind of in sync. Now, if you're really security conscious and you want to make sure that no one can trace you or something, which kind of defeats the point, I believe that most of the online Git hosting platforms do have an @no-reply type of email address you can use instead of your real email address. So if you want to do GitHub, GitHub has a page that talks about it. You can use the email address that they give you. You press enter, and that set the 2 required settings. So we can use git config --global --list to actually list the settings that we have set so far. And that's at the global or user level. So we have user.name and then user.email set to the values that we just set. And this is it. This is the minimal configuration required to do really anything else. We can do these types of commands without setting it, of course, but to do any real work in Git requires these 2 settings. However, since I'm here, there's a couple more settings I want to set. First, I want to make sure that Git will use Nano as its core editor, or its default editor. So git config --global core.editor. Then set it to Nano. Since it's a single word, we don't need to put it in quotes. Now, if I had additional options needed, then I would have to surround that command in quotes. Great. Now I can actually confirm that Git is using Nano as its core editor. I can do that with git config --global -e. That's going to load the Git configuration file into the default editor, whatever that is. So hopefully that will be Nano. There we are. We have our .git config file loaded into our default editor for Git, which is Nano. Now, we need to press Control X to exit. All right, now we have one more setting that I would like to set. Git config --global push.default. I'm going to use simple. So this is basically setting the default push operation or default push approach to use simple. And that basically says that whatever branch I'm on, which will start off with master, make sure you push that up to the corresponding remote branch that's also named master. It'll make more sense a little bit later on. Now, the reason why I'm setting this is because prior to Git 2.0, starting about Git 1.8, the Git command would start warning you about the upcoming change in Git 2.0 to this new setting. This is actually the default right now. because we're past to since we're past Git 2.0. However, even after transitioning to Git 2.0, Git continued to warn us that this is now the new default. However, to me that's kind of annoying. So I like to set this value. That way, Git stops nagging me with letting me know what's already been transitioned over. Now, at some point in the future, maybe already, depending on which version of Git you have, this may not nag you anymore. But I like to set it. That way, it's not going to nag you or me or anyone else, depending on what version of Git they're using. All right, so we're good to go. Now let's see if we have that file, which we should. We've already opened it with Nano using the core editor. Again, I'm in my user's home directory. If I do an ls-a, that's show all files, I should have a .git config file here. I can use the cat command to echo out to the terminal the entire contents of the .git config file, or I can use Nano directly. Either way, or whatever your favorite text editor is. All right, let's clear out of this. Now that we have set up our Git configuration, ready for the last little bit. That is the Git Prompt script, and a few other tweaks, but mainly the Git Prompt script that we want to set up. The benefit here is that when we're inside a Git repository, I want it to show which branch I'm on within the prompt. All right, head back over here, and within Linux Mint, we already have a .bashrc file, so we don't actually need to create a new one by scratch. Instead, we just need to augment it. So I'm going to open up my web browser, and I have the snippet of code that I need to use in a Git repository that I manage. So I'm going to github.com/taylor/training/courses. You go to there. This is my organization that I control on GitHub. And within here, I have an installations repository. So if you click into here, I have a bit of information here under Linux/Mint. So go into here, and then I have this bashrc-snip.sh. This is meant to take the code here and just paste it at the end of the bashrc file. To make sure I get this without any extra fluff, I'm going to go into raw. Now let's copy the entire contents and head back over to our terminal. Let's make sure we're in our user's home directory, which we are. Now I can use Nano to open up the bashrc file. I'm going to go all the way to the end. Once at the end, I can paste in the contents that should be in my clipboard. Great. Now, once that's pasted in, I can exit out. I'll be prompted to make sure I want to save everything that's been modified. I'm going to say yes. And now I should have my changes inside the bashrc file. Now, one thing we do want to make sure and we can open up the bashrc file again and go all the way to the bottom just to make sure that nothing sort of got wrapped by accident. Sometimes, depending on the editor, depending on settings, if it's a super long line, it'll automatically wrap. But it looks like we're good. So usually the long lines have a little $sign at the end, indicating that it's off the screen but it didn't wrap. So that looks all good. So I just wanted to verify that. I didn't want to encounter problems, because the next step is to exit out of this terminal and start it up again to see about our changes. And before we do that, let's review what happens on this. Let's review what happens within this part of the script. So of course it's going to the bottom of the bashrc file that we already have, and all we're doing is adding this if-else statement to the very end. And what we're doing here is we're checking to see if the .get-prompt.sh file exists or not. If it does exist, then we're going to source it. Basically, we're going to execute the code that's contained within the Git Prompt script. That allows us to call a special function that's defined within it, which allows us to set up our ps1 variable, which is what controls our prompt. And you can even see within here there's a bunch of code variables and stuff like that. There's a bunch of code commands in here that sets up kind of a coloration with our prompt. And then we're using the get_ps1 function. If that file doesn't exist, I still like to have a nice, pretty looking prompt. So I set up this ps1 prompt to have a bunch of colorization in it. That's it. All right, let's close our browser since we're done with it. And now let's reopen the terminal. Now, things should look a little different. So now we just have the username, colon, and then the directory, which in this case is simply tilde, with a little space and then our $sign for the prompt that really separates between the beginning part of our prompt and then the input part of our prompt. And that's it. That confirms our Git prompt is set up correctly. It really won't shine until we get into a Git directory, which we'll do a bit later. All right, now it's time to review the steps we went through and to look at other installation options, especially for other distributions of Linux. What we just did, since we're part of the Debian family, which includes Ubuntu, Linux Mint, and some other things, we used the apt-get package manager. So we had to do sudo apt-get install git. And I also included the git-GUI as well. Then to verify, we simply ask Git for its version. If you're Red Hat or CentOS, or a really old version of Fedora, then you would use yum. And depending on how it's set up, you might need to use the sudo command or login as root to run root, or login as root to run the yum command. It's simply yum install git. Then, of course, we're going to verify with git version. Now, if you're running a relatively modern version of Fedora, this has been available since version 18, but it became default in 22 afterwards. You can use the newfangled dnf command, which is like the new version of yum. Again, you're going to have to use sudo or login as root, then dnf install git. You can kind of see there's a bit of a pattern here. Basically, your package manager, install git. And that should be it. Then you're going to verify using the version. Then you're going to verify with git version. All right, thank you very much. And if you prefer, you can see the installation notes in the description.